Okay.
Okay, guys.
Guess we're living on
So-
a planet I don't want to sit by my friends anymore. That's the planet we're living on.
All right. So, like Mrs. Fox said, we're talking about the 1920s today, which is often called the Roaring 20s. What do you guys want to take a guess? Why do you think it's called the Roaring 20s? What's that? Can you say that a little louder?
It was just partying.
It was just partying. Is that what you said?
Alcohol
Sorry.
was banned.
That's true.
It was an age
Not very
where
effective.
partying was very, very common in very many cities.
Okay, that's true. Party age.
Everyone,
Hey. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
everyone wanted to live their life how they wanted to live it. They wanted to have pleasure throughout most of their life.
Okay, so a lot more like pleasure seeking, kind of like rebelling against the standards imposed upon them by their parents and society and whatnot. Kind of that type of attitude. Is that what you're saying?
We're trying to live like how the rich would live in the older days.
Okay.
More rich people would spend their money on this things for pleasure. They wanted to do the same thing. Like middle class people want to do that.
It's like luxuries.
Luxury
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah, all that stuff is very true. But it's not. It wasn't just that though. One of the reasons it's called 20s is because there was a lot of conflict between all of that and the people who didn't want the change. There was a lot of change happening, and there was a lot of resistance to that change. So, but another big thing about the 20s that I want you guys to remember is it's really the start of the modern American culture. A lot of what encompasses our lives today had its start in the 20s. A lot of it didn't exist before then. And so the first part of that was economic. So after World War I, America is doing a heck of a lot better than everyone else. Because what happened to countries like Britain and France and Germany? They got what?
They got fricked.
Okay, sure. that's one way to put it. They're not in good shape. They're like economically they're trashed. Especially Germany. We'll get to that in a later day. And so this kind of kicks off what some people call the American century. Why do you think the 20th century is called the American century by some people?
Because America might have been the most powerful country at the time in the world.
Yeah, from this point on, the United States becomes the dominant, most influential country in the world. There's some debate on whether that's still true today, but throughout the 20th century, that absolutely was true. Like no ifs or buts about it. And so America becomes the world's largest actor in a sense. Mrs. Fox.
Sorry, 1 second.
Okay.
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 All terms you gotta know for your
All
test.
right. So, one of the big things economically, the big thing that starts in America in the 20s is what's known as consumer culture. So a number of things contributed to this. So first off, we had something called mass production. So you had companies that started cranking out products on a scale that had never been seen before. And so and part of that was because they, like say Henry Ford invented something like the assembly line. I'll show you a picture of that in a sec. But basically it allowed companies to make products at a way cheaper price, and so they could charge less money for it. If you charge less money for it, more people can buy it. And with how many products they were making, well, we needed demand for that. And so it started this consumer culture. A little note, capitalism, that's something that you'll need to know. And then, but related to the mass production aspect, companies started widely advertising. I'll show you some advertisements for the 20s in a sec. Yes, question.
Okay, this is a really weird question, but isn't communism technically legal in the U.S. even though the main thing is capitalism?
Communism?
Like, it's like communists are allowed to be communist, and
Yes.
have that belief, but
Have that belief, yes.
and
You
have
can
that-
belong to the communist. Technically, you can belong to the Communist Party. Yes, because you're allowed to belong to whatever party you want. Now, socially, are you going to be blacklisted? Or are people going to think you're a weirdo? Yes.
Yeah.
There's going to be consequences, but
Yeah.
you can legally. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
There's a article
couldn't legally do it in the 1950s, but you'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can now.
Sorry, that was just something that I was wondering and figured
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Yeah, but capitalism that's definitely how America's economies are based on. America's economy is not based on communism in the slightest. But so, because there was so much, now there was a whole lot of our products being put out, companies started widely advertising, and so this is when you have companies start to have advertisements like we see all the time today. I'll show you some of those in a minute. And then,
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for
Oh,
a
yeah.
second. So my favorite ad is the billboard coming into Rigby. That's for Good to Go, and it says "Would pee here again." Have you guys seen that one? That one makes me laugh, but it does make you kind of go, "Oh, maybe I should go there," right? Because a lot of times for convenience stores, you want someplace you can go to the bathroom if you're traveling, and we're a major Highway 20 is majorly up to take tourists up to Yellowstone, right? So that's a brilliant strategy that they took that and they put that billboard. That's just my favorite, just interjecting there. Go ahead.
yeah. And then the last thing too, well, wait, there's all these products. I don't have enough money to buy it. That's okay because banks and credit have your back. This is when credit buying started becoming huge. This will become very important when you guys get to the Great Depression, because one of the big causes of the Great Depression. And so people would just buy stuff all the time with money they didn't actually have. Next.
You guys got that all?
Okay.
Yes, okay. So raise your hand if you've already gotten a credit card application in the mail. Oh, they're coming. For those of you who haven't raised your hand, they're gonna be coming. Okay?
Oh yeah.
They like to hit up teenagers. Why?
Because teenagers are stupid.
Oh, you're so mean to yourself. Okay, you're not dumb. You're just ignorant in the ways of the economy a lot of times, right? And they're banking on the fact that, oh, here's a credit card, and I want you to be able to buy stuff, which you all want to buy stuff, let's be honest, right? And I don't have enough money, so here's this convenient little card that will help me buy the things I want. What's the problem with that, though?
Put you in debt.
Yeah, massive debt, because the interest rates on those things are huge, like 12%. Okay? And then you have to pay it back what you borrowed plus 12% extra of what you borrowed. Right? And if you don't have a job in the first place to buy what you want, are you going to be able to pay off your credit card?
No.
No, okay? So they target your age group big time, trying to basically exploit your ignorance on the economy. So, just FYI.
Yeah.
All
One of the big things that was happening in the 20s was basically the reason it's called consumer culture is because that really was part of the culture. It really was becoming part of the culture. Like, it was socially acceptable to go into debt buying extravagant stuff. It was no longer socially acceptable to save money. It was like frowned upon. So
Weird.
yeah. And so, okay, who can tell me who that is?
Robert E. Lee.
No.
Zuko.
Somebody just said it. I heard
I heard someone say it.
Henry Ford.
it.
Henry Ford, yes.
Uh-oh.
I heard you guys just did a time on him.
Little shading on his eyes.
Yeah. So he came up with what was known as the assembly line. So I'm sure you guys have probably seen pictures or videos of this at some point. It basically allowed, it was a method that allowed products to be made at a way cheaper price. And that's what basically led to mass production being able to happen. All right, next. All right, so next I'm going to show you guys some advertisements from the 20s, and we're going to talk about them.
Sorry, just a second. This froze.
They're good.
There we go. Okay.
All right.
Look at that ad.
So, what do you guys think that Coca-Cola is trying to say
Talking to you, right?
to people who are seeing this?
Say that
Is this
again.
when
What?
Coke still had actual Coke in it?
Yeah.
Like
What?
powder. Is this when like the Coca-Cola was still made with like
Cocaine.
Cocaine.
yeah?
Yes.
like
Yes. This is the 1920s. Yeah.
Yeah.
when did they stop making it?
Like the 1930s.
Yeah. But what is, so I'll repeat what I said. What is Coca-Cola trying to say it will happen if you buy their product?
You're welcome home.
You're what?
You're welcome home.
There you go. You're welcome home. So basically, you're gonna be the person everyone loves because you brought the Coca-Cola home. You're gonna be more loved. Advertisements started really targeting those kind of things. They started targeting your emotions. They still do.
Who is this?
Debbie
It does kind of look like her, yeah. Okay, more specifically, not a specific person, but what does this represent?
Just isn't it kind of like the perfect American ideal?
Yeah. So you've got the ideal housewife, right? How can I tell she's a housewife?
Her plaid.
Dress.
Yeah, her dress,
The hairdo.
plus it says at home, right? And nothing is better, gentlemen, than your wife when you come home handing you a fresh, cold Coca-Cola to welcome you home, right?
She's pretty strong. She's just kind of
Okay.
like holding her.
Yeah, it's true.
I've been waiting to snip with you.
All right, yeah, next one.
She just did it.
All right, this one I found pretty funny.
That's what we know.
Hey, listen.
But aside from it being pretty funny, what do you guys see here? Any similarities maybe to the previous one?
They're putting doctors in there to make it seem like it's more safe than anything else because
Yeah.
doctors deal with pain.
Exactly. We see this type of thing all the time. You watch an ad for Sprite and you see Kobe Bryant drinking a Sprite. You're like, oh man, Kobe Bryant's drinking a Sprite. That must mean that I gotta drink a Sprite too. You know.
No, I was Coke. I just like
But wouldn't that make you want to drink this?
No, absolutely not.
It would. All right, next one. Okay, this one's got an audio
Okay.
clip. This is one of the greatest advertisements I've ever heard.
Oh yeah, this is great. Ready? You gotta
This is
listen.
fantastic.
What the heck?
We got an audio.
And now a message from our sponsor.
This is an actual radio ad from the 20s.
Ladies, tired of
Well, it happened.
That's okay. I'll get it.
drying your hair with the same old vacuum cleaner? Try Avant Shade brand new Beauty Lock portable hair dryer. It's smaller, it's faster, it's guaranteed to give you the hair you've always wanted in half the time. Beauty Lock is delicate and dainty, just like you. The dryer weighs only a pound and easily fits in your head. Now that's beauty and convenience. With a speedy motor that will dry your hair in as little as 25 minutes, you can get gorgeous hair without falling behind schedule. Don't worry about the little ones or that pie in the oven. Thanks to an extra long extension cord, you can move around while crimping your locks. Forget those long trips to the salon and no more waiting for hours on the monster machine. Avant Shade gives you an easy and speedy hairdo that will blow your man away. Get it now at your nearest Macy's.
All
Make sure
right.
you get that down. I know it's kind of small. Sorry. I'll make it
Yeah.
bigger.
New products made life easier for women.
Yes.
Sorry.
My favorite part is when they say dry your hair in just 25 minutes, as if that's some amazing thing. Which maybe it is if you've got super thick
My
ones.
hair's still
My favorite part of that one was tired of drying your hair with the same old vacuum cleaner. I was like, that's weird.
But this really shows a big target audience of advertisements though, and that was women, especially household women. This was the decade of the women. Women had just received the right to vote. That was pretty big. And so women became a larger player in the economic role. Companies recognized that, and so they're decided they're going to capitalize on that hardcore. And the products really did make life easier for a lot of women who could afford them anyway. All right.
That poor neck.
The what?
The neck of the lady.
Oh.
That hurts my neck.
All right, Mrs. Fox. Yeah.
And now a message from our sponsor.
There we go. Okay. So kind of what we was talking about before about how the building up the consumer culture and credit buying. This really ended up being a big thing. Consumer debt nearly tripled, and it really was a culture of buying and spending money you didn't have. And we'll talk about that extensively because you'll get into it plenty during the Great Depression. This ends up being one of the big causes of the Great Depression because so much stuff was being bought with money people didn't have. And so if the economy tanked, which it did, everyone's money goes up. All right. So now we go to the cultural aspect. There's actually a lot here, like that we won't be talking about. There's a lot that happened, but these are some of the big ones. So city life and farming. I guess write down the New Women one that Mrs. Fox will need you to have. We'll talk about each one of these in more detail, but basically life was not the same for urban and rural people. Everything I've said before up to this point basically doesn't apply to farmers. Modernism is a new philosophy that basically involved rejecting a lot of the old stuff, embracing new philosophies. We'll talk more about that. New women, also sometimes known as flappers. I'll show some pictures of them later. It's funny because they were considered super scandalous, but it's like nothing compared to today.
Wait till you see what they're wearing. Oh, so scandalous. You can see their ankles.
I know. And then new technologies, radio, TV, and cars. We'll talk more about those in a bit as well. All right. So farming life. Again, everything we said for this part didn't really apply to farmers. The Great Depression started early for these farmers partially because they had all this demand during the First World War for food, especially overseas. It's gone now. And also the government was supporting farmers during World War I. They're not anymore. And many farmers didn't actually own their own farms. And so when they couldn't make ends meet, the bank took their farm away. And plus, a lot of them were spending money on new technologies that were coming out, which actually did increase productivity. But the problem was that there was so much produce that the prices just absolutely dropped, and they didn't make any money. And culturally, they were very different. Even today, I know we're in kind of East Idaho, so it's pretty different from a place like New York City or LA. But if you go to those places, you'll still see some remnants of basically city bias, where you have people who just look down on people who come from the country. Still exists today, and the cultural difference has been happening for a while.
So I had a colleague when I worked at Buell. Now Buell, Idaho, you guys, is tiny, right? Their whole school had like 286 kids in it. So tiny place, rural, lots of farming. It's the trout capital of the world, actually. It's like fishing and farming and different things over there. And it's west of Twin Falls, right? I had a colleague when I was working there who came from LA. She grew up in LA. She had her doctorate from UCLA. She was very well educated, very much from the city. Her husband's grandfather lived in Buell. And they visited one time, and she wanted her son to grow up more like in the country. So they moved to Buell. She got a job there. She was there for 1 year because she could not handle how slow-paced everything was, like in a country setting like Buell. And she also was so completely ignorant to things that, like, you and I would be like, what the heck? Like, she really did not know that milk came from cows. Like, we took her to a dairy, and she's like, I don't understand, where's this milk from? We're like, the cow outside. Like, they're milking it. Oh, so, like, where does goat's milk come from? Goats. Like, she was literally in shock by, like, really ignorant about those kind of things that we are like, what the heck is wrong with you? But she definitely had that attitude of, like, well, I'm from LA, and I know more about life than anybody else in this podunk little town of Buell. But really, she ended up looking, like, super ignorant because the rural stuff she had no clue about. So that bias is definitely still very much part of society even today.
Okay, so as far as new technology goes, these were the big three that really impacted life. the radio became the way to be entertained, advertised to, know what was going on, all that good stuff. President Calvin Coolidge was the first president to have radio broadcasted nationwide addresses. Things like spectator sport events, which also became pretty big. Yet another thing we don't have time to talk about in this decade. Automobiles became huge again. Henry Ford, everything he did. By the end of the decade, about half of Americans had cars, which was a massive jump from the beginning of the decade, where there were like almost none. And then movies, won't talk extensively about, but this was the decade movies really got their stride. And movies I find movies fascinating because they're the only art form that's like purely American. Like America is the home center for movies, and they're by far the most influential art form, like of all time right now.
So a lot of this stuff we're going to cover on Friday when we talk about the 1920s and 30s culture. Like, I'm going to show you clips from like the radio when they talked about like Babe Ruth. We're going to look at like the sports heroes. We're going to look also at Charlie Chaplin, and we're going to watch a movie, one of the very first silent ones he did, called The Little Tramp. Now keep in mind, when I say tramp, that is vastly different than what your mind just went to. Okay? It's somebody who's homeless. All right? So we will look into this a lot more on Friday, the cultural part of it. Okay? All right, do you guys have this down?
Okay, so look how scandalous this is. But seriously, this was considered very scandalous because it was so different than how women had dressed for centuries and centuries and centuries. And, you know, we call it the Roaring '20s not just because there was a lot of change, but because there was also a lot of pushback to that change. We remember the flapper as like the icon of the 1920s, but really, they were actually in the minority. They were just very loud minority, and so they really stick in our minds. Apply that to social media. Anyway, but it just went so far against the Victorian model of how women should be, that they should always be housewives and mothers, and that they should be always subservient to their husbands. And this was like the total end of the spectrum. Women were like, no, we don't want to do that anymore. This is a very common trend throughout a lot of things with the 20s. And speaking of, so modernism is one of the big legacies, and this is possibly the biggest thing that has impacted us today. That's saying a lot because there's a lot of things that impact us today. Basically, it was a huge philosophical movement. There was it was break from tradition, and it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. A lot of ways we don't have time to go into today. So ways like art, literature, music. This is the decade when the Jazz Age happened. The Harlem Renaissance as well. A lot of stuff we don't have time for. Harlem Renaissance was basically the emerging of African American culture, and that basically it became something to actually be celebrated and not something to be hid because blacks were inferior.
We're going to go into that hardcore more on Friday as well.
Yeah. And one of the big ones, though, was about religion. See, one of the big things that kicked off modernism was a lot of new scientific discoveries. In particular, Albert Einstein and Charles Darwin. The theory of evolution was a big one. We're about to talk about something where that was pretty huge in just a bit. But like Einstein came up with the theory of relativity. Well, a lot of people said relativity. So you're saying that space and time are relative to each other? Yes, they are. Except people took that as meaning, oh, well, lots of other things are relative too. Like, what's right and wrong? Yeah, they took a lot of the scientific concepts and used them outside of their intended, fields. And then Darwin's theory of evolution, a lot of people, particularly Christians, believed that basically it can't be true because it contradicts the Bible. And we're going to get into that in just a little more in just a minute. This is kind of a fun little thing. These two paintings are like classical art, This is a modernist art piece.
Too bad.
Yeah, right? Basically, modernist art was like, the attitude of modernist art was, is it art? Well, it is, because I say it's art. There's a lot more to it than that, but that was the basic gist of it. Okay, this is a brief video on what was known as the Scopes monkey trial. So a little bit of background, there was a teacher in Tennessee named John Scopes, and he decided to teach Darwinian evolution in a public school, which was against a Tennessee law at the time. He did this purely for publicity. He did not actually intend to, like, he actually later admitted to not remembering whether or not he taught evolution. He did it for publicity's sake, so there would be a trial. So let's watch the video.
John Scopes, a young teacher of Tennessee, had taught, contrary to state law, Darwin's theory of evolution. The Tennessee country people believed this was contrary to biblical doctrine. The Scopes trial got worldwide publicity, with the Tennessee fundamentalists lined up against the liberals and intellectuals of America. William Jennings Bryan, old and full of oratory, defended the beliefs of the fundamentalists. He was aided by the prosecuting zeal of old Judge Ben Mackenzie, a local politician influential in the area, who helped to make the trial an inquisition. The courtroom was packed as the case reached a climax. Arthur Garfield Hayes, defending Scopes, explained Darwin's theory of evolution, and Dudley Field Malone, another liberal, added his plea for tolerance to the cause of freedom of thought. Then the defense threw in another artful veteran, Clarence Darrow, for what turned out to be the cross-examination of Bryan. Darrow, in a shirt sleeves analysis, reduced the elder statesman's antiquated ideas to intellectual rubble.
After the closing remarks, Judge Ralston charged the jury, and they retired for their deliberations on a verdict. On the day of the announced decision, the two opposing sides waited calmly in the courtroom. The jury foreman, Captain Jack Thompson, delivered the verdict of guilty as charged. John Scopes received the decree of his $100 fine without any outward show of bitterness. 2 years later, the decision was to be reversed in the Appellate Court of Appeals. William Jennings Bryan died 5 days after the end of the famous trial. Although victorious in the courtroom, he and the fundamentalist cause had been destroyed. The encounter in Dayton, Tennessee, had solved the basic struggle of thinking and education in the modern-day world.
No. All right, I want you guys to answer these two questions for me. So, why did Scopes make the trial happen? Now, to recap, there was a law prohibiting the teaching of evolution in public schools, and he taught evolution in public schools. Why?
Because it went against biblical doctrine.
Okay, so that's why the law was in place.
Oh.
But why did... No, that's a good point, though. That's a good point, though. That'll really come into play the second question. Why did Scopes knowingly break the law?
Publicity.
For publicity. Because he wanted to make it a big deal. And he succeeded at that. Right? And what was the trial really about?
Making it so that it's not such a big deal to teach evolution in public schools.
Okay, you're on the right. Yeah, you're on the right track. But the video kind of touched on this. What was the main thing that was debated at the trial? Was it whether Scopes was guilty or not? No, there was no question that he was guilty of breaking the law. What was the main thing that was debated at the trial? What's that?
Whether or not should be taught in class, right?
I mean, yeah, that was certainly talked about. But again, kind of think back to what Ollie said, why was the law in place in the first place?
Because they went against biblical doctrine.
Exactly. Or at least they viewed it. There's been a lot of debate on whether that's actually true. But the prevailing theory at that time was that if you're a Christian, you can't believe in evolution. And if you accept the theory of evolution, you can't accept the Bible. That was the prevailing. It was very much an either or situation. And the trial actually got really tense. I would recommend like looking more into it because it's actually a really fascinating story. But really, it shows the Scopes trial really showed it was very emblematic of that conflict of the 20s, particularly the facet of religion and philosophy, because it was that constant tension between old and new, modernism versus what was known as fundamentalism, basically the upholding of old values and ideas because they're the old